Hello, I am Nicole from the Singapore Art Museum, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to our first edition of Collection and Connection. Today's session is titled The Giant Panda and the Power of Cute. This program is part of Sam's exhibition, The Gift, which is currently showing at the National Gallery, Singapore. Today, I'm very pleased to introduce to you our three speakers. We have with us Dr. Cheng Wen-Haur from the Mandai Wildlife Group, Dr. Graeme Smith from Australian National University, and my colleague Dr. Lim Chai Hong from the Singapore Art Museum. Thank you all for joining us today. And now to get us warmed up for this evening's talk, I'd like to take a quick poll of our audience here. We have some beautiful animals to show you on this slide, but if you had to choose just one, which animal would you most like to protect? We have the giant panda, the pangolin, the Rhode Island snake-necked turtle, and lastly, the straw-headed bobo. You can vote for your preference now in the Zoom poll on your screen. I'll just give everyone a chance to respond. All these species here are cared for by our Mandai Wildlife Group parks and have programs in the wild to help their survival. But these animals are all endangered, and if you had to nominate just one to protect, which one would it be? Just give everyone another couple of seconds. Okay, so I can see that most people have answered the poll. So we'll share the results right now. Unsurprisingly, the giant panda has come out tops. And I believe our speakers will have a lot more to say on that choice and the cute factor as well later. So without further ado, I shall now hand the time over to Chye Hong to tell us more about our guest speakers. Chye Hong, please.
Salutations to audience, both local and global. I'm Chye Hong from the Singapore Art Museum. Thank you for taking the time to join us on this fascinating journey to explore the role of gifts in global diplomacy, in particular gifts that are exchanged within the context of institutions that acquire, conserve, and exhibit the tangible and or intangible heritage of humanity. Our topic today is the giant panda and the power of cute. Giant panda are all so adorable that it's difficult not to fall in love with them. The charismatic giant panda is the featured animal on the logo for the World Wildlife Fund as the symbol of all endangered species. The giant panda is also undeniably one of the most successful ambassadors that expresses China's soft power. For this talk, we would like to shine the spotlight on panda mania, cross-cultural exchanges, and the protection of wildlife. Now for some housekeeping. Graeme and I will help moderate the question. While we are fielding the question along the way, we seek your understanding that we may not be able to go through all the questions. We thank you in advance for your understanding. Joining me today is Dr. Cheng Wen-Haur and Dr. Graeme Smith. Dr. Cheng Wen-Haur is Deputy CEO, Life Sciences and Operation, and Chief Life Sciences Officer at Mandai Wildlife Group. A veterinarian by training, Dr. Cheng has held senior leadership positions in zoos in Australia and China. He's also the president of the Southeast Asian Zoos and Aquarium Association and the chairman of the Board of Trustees for Species 360. Dr. Graeme Smith is a fellow in the Department of Pacific Affairs at the Australian National University. He is co-host with the award-winning literary podcast with former NPR and BBC China correspondent Louisa Lim, and one of the few Western scholars who have worked with local government in China. A big round of virtual applause for both guests. Well, Singapore has just welcomed the birth of a baby panda recently, and this is 7 years in the making, and the little bundle of joy is very interestingly born on the 7th day of the 7th lunar month, which happened to coincide with the Chinese Double Seven Festival, which is Qixi, also considered by some to be Chinese Valentine's Day. Wen-Haur, you must have been thrilled about the arrival of the baby panda, and congratulations to the team at Mandai Wildlife Group. Could you share with us the journey behind the scenes in the recent past of the birth of the baby panda?
Thank you, Chye Hong, and thanks for the introduction as well as the congratulations. Yes, indeed, it's been a long time coming. It's taken us 7 years and in fact about 5 breeding seasons. So I think we're going to be sharing some of the pictures so that while I talk, okay, so the guests can have a look at that as well. So according to the slide, it says that, the 12th of August, the vets started seeing the embryo. In fact, we actually saw it about 1 week ago. So in fact, later, as you will see that, in fact, 2 days after this, the giant panda was born. So giant pandas are very, very hard to breed in human care and very, very hard. Their pregnancy is very hard to confirm as well. And part of the reason is that because the embryo is so small. So if you go on to the next slide, you will see that, 2 weeks after we first detected the embryo on ultrasound, the Jia, the mother, gave birth to her first cub. So as you can see, as for normal for giant pandas when they were born, the cubs were very, very underdeveloped. So in fact, they were 1/900th the size of the mother, and it is normal. So they're born blind, hairless, and pink, pretty much like a large rat rather than giant panda. So if you go on to the next slide, then you will see that the first-time mother, Jia, well, it's taken her a long time to become pregnant, but she just took to become a super mom straight away. So she just picked up the baby, doing all the right thing. The photos are showing that this is about 1 week old now. So in the first few days, you start seeing that the white fuzz started coming out. Nearer the end of the 1 week, you start seeing the dark pigmentation coming through to start forming the very distinctive black and white designer giant panda coloration. So if you go on to the next slide, and yep, Supermom Jia continued to be a good mother, licking the baby constantly, caring for her and milking and suckling rather. And as far as the baby is concerned, they do what they do best. They sleep a lot. They are a very, very good baby. They just sleep and then drink milk, and then they do a lot of growing, which is very important, right? They were born very underdeveloped, and all they do is that all they rely is on the mother's milk, and then they just grow and sleep and suckle and grow. That's what they do. So next slide, please. So seeing that Jia has such a good mom, what we've decided to do is to let her do all the heavy lifting, that she will do the best in caring for the baby. And what you see here is the lead panda keeper, Trish, is trying to condition Jia to be not as protective. She was a good mother, so she's being rewarded. Jia's being rewarded with some her snack, and then the keeper will keep touching the baby, saying that it's okay, and then later it will allow us to examine the cub without alarming the mother too much. So if you go on to the next one, and so it took us a while, nearly 1 month before we know and announce the gender. So the little one turns out to be a boy, and you could see that from the back there. It's actually quite tricky to tell from the very underdeveloped external genitalia whether it's a boy or a girl. So we looked at it and we consulted with our Chinese experts who say that, yep, we have a boy. So, and that there was Kai Kai, the father, announcing to the world to say that, hey, I have a baby boy. Next, please. So this is about few weeks later, then we've been able to be successful to take the cub out now. So this is his first weighting. It's just over 1.5 kilogram now. So next, please. And this is quite a significant milestone. So day 40, and now you could see that the eye, it's the first time it opened the eye and can start exploring the world with the eyesight. So with this, I think we'll take a pause here. And I think Chye Hong, you have some questions for me.
Yes, I was trying. Would you perhaps help us to elucidate why we have a soft spot for the giant panda? I mean, giant pandas have such universal appeal that I think they're really made for this Instagrammable age. And do you Could you help us to understand a little bit better why we are so crazy about them?
I think it is one of those happy coincidences of biology. So the first, the biology of human, right? So we are hardwired to see something with a round head, a short body, and then big wide eyes and forward-looking eyes as something cute. So that really, if you think about it, is actually the picture of a human infant. And in fact, a lot of the mammalian babies are built like that. That is a proportion. And then we are hardwired to be basically care for and love animals of that proportion. So from the giant panda point of view, they did not evolve to look cute. They evolved to survive. So if you look at their very distinctive black and white color, they are actually a type of camouflage. It's called disruptive coloration. It actually breaks up their outline. So if you can imagine that, when everything is covered in snow and giant pandas do not hibernate during winter, so from afar away, all you see is the highlight of the white and the black part just disappears. So it is part of their camouflage. So the big eye patch from afar, it looks like just big eyes. From a human point of view, we perceive that as cute. So as far as the face is concerned, unlike other bears which have a long snout, they actually have a fairly short, round face and quite pushing. And it comes about because they are bamboo eaters. They need to have very, very powerful jaws. Their jaws are very short, and they have these big, chunky muscles to allow them to chew through bamboo. And that gives you the, very, very chubby, sort of a baby face look. Hence, they look really cute. We think they are cute, and they are just, very, very well adapted to survive in the natural environment. So a very, very happy biological coincidence.
Thank you. Well, moving on, let's explore the role of gifts in global diplomacy. I think when humans seek to build reciprocal relationship, they typically begin with a gift. And incidentally, animals in particular hold quite unique significance. And as such, the gifting of animals is not new in the scheme of things. I think, for example, in 1486, a giraffe was sent from Egypt to Europe. And this gift from Mamluk Sultan of Egypt to Lorenzo di Medici was an attempt to establish good diplomatic relationship with the Florentine. The giraffe was very much like the giant panda today, caused quite a huge sensation when it arrived in Florence. Graeme, you worked quite a fair bit with local government in China and the Pacific, and also you researched on diplomatic events on other areas as well. Could you share with us a little bit about gifting, perhaps about reciprocity, cultural sensitivity, etc.?
Yeah, look, lovely to be working with you again, Chye Hong. I've known Chye Hong for quite some time, so it's an absolute delight to be with her on this really interesting topic. So maybe some reflections from my own research, both in China and the Pacific. And gifting in Chinese culture particularly was always very interesting to me, because when I was working in local government, I actually had a place in the org chart. Gifting was kind of a word that people avoided using directly because gifting had become synonymous with corruption. And so at its positive side, it was about respect. It was about showing respect to other people, but also had a slightly darker aspect to it of building reciprocity that you could call on later, and building favors. So essentially building, if you like, guanxi, kind of a network of social connections through gift giving. And at times it was very interesting to watch how creative a lot of my colleagues could be with their gifting, because you couldn't give an outright obvious gift to your superiors to get what you wanted. So one of the practices they come up with was how do we, for example, if you wanted to impress the party secretary, you couldn't just give the money to him. You had to find a way. And what they would do is they would get their wives to play mahjong with his wife. And his wife just happened to have this tremendous run of luck that just blasted all the time. And she would win tens of thousands of yuan at the mahjong tables, all completely innocent. And in addition to that, it sort of came to me that not everyone knew how to perform this gifting as well, because I had friends both in government and in business. And some of the business people weren't really briefed up on the etiquette of how to do this, because they, were just business people. And so they would in one famous case, a friend of mine who sold computer equipment went into a department that they supplied the computers for and simply gave him a supermarket gift card in front of his juniors. And they lost the contract basically straight away, because that's not how you give a gift. You don't make the reciprocity quite that obvious. And sort of shifting, I guess, to my research in the Pacific, one thing I've noticed of late is you have a lot of what you call middle-class Chinese migrants to the Pacific, which initially surprised me because, the Pacific, to be blunt, doesn't have the modern conveniences that you will find in mainland China these days. And when I asked them, why are you going to Vanuatu or Tonga, Fiji, these places? And often they would say it was about yingchou, this sort of ritualized entertainment giving that is part of business and part of politics in China. And it got to a point where their doctors were recommending, look, because you are, as one official put it to me, 应酬就是我的工作. So basically my work is ritualized entertainment and gift giving. And so their doctors would just say, look, you have to get out of this cycle. And they'd gone as far as the Pacific to kind of escape this cycle of 应酬. But of course, the Pacific has its own culture of gift giving. So for Chinese diplomats going to the Pacific, they have to negotiate an absolute minefield that's even trickier in some ways than local government in China. And there was an example from last... Yeah, go ahead, Toyo.
I was going to ask you, is there something that was lost in translation along the way? Because you're navigating so much cultural differences.
So many times, yeah, so many times. And the example I'm going to give is from one of those examples where, so in Kiribati, which just switched its recognition from Taiwan to China, the new ambassador faced a situation where a tradition on one of the islands was, if you're a guest, the young men of the island will lie down in front of your plane and you walk across them. And so this is absolutely tradition. This is not something they made up for the Chinese ambassador. This is what they do. But for every Australian diplomat I talked to was horrified, because they were like, thank goodness it wasn't us that was put in that situation, because we wouldn't know what to do either. Because the problem is it might be fine on the island, but how does it play back in China? How does it play elsewhere in the region? And the general answer is not terribly well. So how do you negotiate a situation like that where you're invited and to refuse the invitation is impolite? So we have our own pandas. We have our own pandas in Australia, obviously the koala, and that's kind of how Australia does diplomatic gift giving. We also do a lot of weird stuff. The weirdest one we probably do is, it's in our gift registry for diplomats, the eucalyptus flavored vodka. Now, I don't know if any of you have tried to chew a eucalyptus leaf, but it's much more suited in flavor to cleaning your floors than it is to drinking vodka. And of course, our panda, the koala, only eats these eucalyptus leaves, which when we gave 4 koalas, which have the names, I've got them down here, beautifully named Paddle, Chan, Palita, and Idalia. So we gifted 4 pandas, so not 4 pandas, 4 koalas for the 50th anniversary of Australia-Singapore relations. And these koalas didn't come cheap, at least by my reckoning. So Singapore shelled out something like $500,000 to host these koalas for 10 months. And we kicked in a fair bit as well. But what was striking is reading the language of the announcement about these koalas. It could have been exactly like one from the People's Republic of China, because in these koala envoys, the press release mentioning them talked about Singapore being a partner in trade, investment, defense, and security. Now, it's not clear what the koalas know about defense and security, whether they're briefed up on these things before they go, but these things are leaked is extremely odd. And one thing that I asked Wen-Haur before the talk was, are the pandas universally cute? Like, does every nation on earth find the panda cute? And his answer was yes, which astonished me, because if you could pop up that slide that I believe I have a slide lurking in the deck. So as an Australian, I'd always assumed that the kangaroo was universally cute, and so did my government when they went into Africa and tried to, shall we say, cultivate some votes for the UN Security Council. And it didn't go so well, because the first reaction to Australian aid in Africa was, if you change the slide, why on earth is your logo a rat? So this is a wonderful thing that's quite endemic throughout South Africa and East Africa, which looks just like a kangaroo, but everyone thinks of it as a rodent. So the question in Africa was, that's not a cute logo, that's a rat. That's really weird. So yes, these things don't always get translated well or are lost in translation. Yeah, cute is not universal, except for the panda.
Now, back to this idea of cute pandas. I mean, are we agreeable that the giant panda is a very successful ambassador? I mean, for soft power China, or actually for conservation? Are you agreeable to that?
Maybe Chye Hong, I'll take that question first. So I think in terms of ambassador, so that's the human ambassador. So more in a conservation circle, or in the zoo circle, we would think of, all the animals in our care are the ambassadors for their wild counterparts. When you have, a super iconic species like giant panda that is very well loved, very attractive, so we like to think of them as an ambassador, species for all the other threatened species as well. We tell the story for the other species, just make it, that much easier to communicate that language. So I think in that regard, yes, they are a very successful, very effective ambassador species for the other threatened animals. And in the sense that giant panda is only what is called, the term is called endemic. When an animal or a plant is endemic to a region, to a country, it means that it's found nowhere else. So it is found only in China, where it is very well regarded, very well protected. So it's regarded as, has got this status of being a national treasure. So when it is so highly regarded, so well protected by its country of origin, and then when the country is very selective to say that, which country I want to send the giant panda to, and when they do that, it is always a symbol of friendship, and going back to the point that you refer about the gifting and all that. And so I think it's very important. It's very full of symbolism, and that if we think that you are competent enough, have all the right resources, all the skill and technology to look after the giant panda, then we allow you to take care of giant panda on behalf of China. So there's a lot of trust in there as well. So in that regard, we can certainly look at giant panda as an ambassador, representing the people of China and the culture of China as well.
I was reading that actually some people actually said that the panda as a diplomatic tool can be traced back to at least the Tang dynasty. I'm not too sure about the validity of that claim, but it did say that Emperor Iucn actually sent a pair of bears, and some actually claims that it actually was the panda to the Emperor Japan. And but actually, if we look at the history of the panda diplomacy, I think it started as early as the 1950s, and I think at first it was gifted to other countries. I think the first panda actually went to the Soviet Union, and then subsequently with the 80s, they were opening up to sending pandas to Western countries. And then I think there's a slight change in the 90s whereby they stopped gifting pandas, but instead actually looking more specifically at panda for loan, and then as well as a ambassador for, I think, conservation in that context. I think Graeme, just now you talked a little bit about this idea of guanxi, which is connection, and how do you look at this idea of kind of animal as diplomacy in that context? Do you think that it is a manifestation of goodwill to a country, and does it look like it's also a consolidation of partnership and friendship?
Yeah, look, Absolutely, it's all of those things you've just described. But I might actually use that as a segue to the first question that's come up in the chat that arrived right as we were starting the talk, because this sort of illustrates how the panda in some ways is more complex than a supermarket gift card, because with the panda comes family, comes lineage, and the first question comes from I can't quite catch the name here, but it's asking our baby panda, interesting use of the word our baby panda will be born and bred in Singapore, going back to China in 2 years' time. So are the parents going back also as a family? So a very Confucian question in some ways. How is this something you've come across before?
Yes, well, the giant panda cub will be going back in 2 years' time, and that is pretty much following the natural history of the giant panda. So by the time a cub is 2 years old, in fact, about 18 months old, they are considered independent. They will leave their mother and they do not leave a family. So there's no such thing as family. Giant pandas are unsocial species. So they are solitary. Giant panda adults, they do their own thing. The males have their own territory, maybe sharing a territory with a few females. So once a year, they come together when the female is on heat. They will mate and then they'll go their own way. The mother, if she's pregnant, she will give birth to the cub on her own, raise the cub on her own, and then 18 months, 2 years time, the cub will disperse. There we go again. So that is why the baby will go back to China. And in fact, the whole program of the China in human care, so most of them are in China. Some of them, about 50 or so, are outside of China in various countries. So think of it as a start book program, right? It is a coordinated, cooperative breeding program. And then it is an arranged marriage so that, the start bookkeeper decide that, who is the most compatible. And the compatibility is decided by their genetics. So they want to make sure that in human care, we are not, inadvertently resulting in inbreeding. So we want them to outbreed them as much as possible to ensure and promote high genetic diversity. So that is why the Kai and Jia will continue to be with us. We are in discussion with the Chinese authority. So hopefully that we want them to stay with us for another term. So possibly another 5 years. The discussion is still ongoing. So after that, but the baby will go back. And then in about 2 years' time, we hope that if Jia is still with us and Kai is still with us, we will hope for another cub during that period of time. So let's hope that we will have a second made in Singapore giant panda baby.
I want to go back to this idea of the panda baby, because I suppose that at the Mandai Wildlife Group, you must have received a lot of suggestions for naming the baby panda. Do we have a short list already? Or how many people and how many people have actually voluntarily suggested names?
Okay, so we had that sort of suggest a name exercise after we announced that it is a boy. So in a space of about 7 days or so, we had about 37,000 entries, and out of that, 8,000 unique names. So from that, that's created a lot of name for us. We have managed to whittle that down to a short list of about 10, and then we have a very, very high-powered internal panel chaired by our board members and some external people, the Chinese language university lecturer, and quite a few people with some Chinese ambassador being in the panel as well. So we went through that list, and then the Singapore government officials went through that list as well, just to make sure that the names that are being proposed are all very adequate, very appropriate. And then, so with that list now, it's gone back to China, and the Chinese Panda agency say that they would like to look at the list and to make sure once again that they are appropriate. And importantly, from their point of view, there shouldn't be any repetition of names that have already been used by the Chinese panda, all pandas that are in the start book. So we are waiting for the approved list to come back from China. And what we will then do is out of that, we will upload 5 top names, and that should be in early November. So watch out for that. When the 5 shortlist names come back, then the Singaporeans will have another chance to pick, your giant panda cub's name.
Graeme, could you share with us a little bit about why is there such a fuss and naming in the Chinese tradition?
Look, it's not just the Chinese tradition. I have to confess that I have 2 children, and they were both nameless for the first 2 weeks of their life, because the process of negotiating the right name to fit them took at least 2 weeks. I'm sure there were better organized people who named their child as soon as they were born, but thankfully ours survived 2 weeks, and they had names. So it's not just the Chinese tradition. I think all cultures have an element of concern about this. But if you were to blame any one person, you would probably blame Confucius, because that was what he laid down as his #1 concern. And it's one of those really interesting exchanges in the Analects where usually the exchanges he has with his disciples are quite respectful. But when he is asked the question by his disciple, if you were to run a country, what is the first thing you would do? And he replies very simply, #1 job, rectify the names. And Zulu, I think it was, says, basically expresses astonishment, like, why is that your #1 thing? There's surely a lot of things to think about when you're running a state, rather than worry about the names. And, he more or less loses it. And I'm going to quote from Simon Leys here. He replies, how boorish can you get? If the names are not correct, language is without an object. And he goes on to explain, when language is without an object, no affair can be effected. Rights and music wither, punishment and penalties miss their target, and people do not know where they stand. Therefore, whatever a gentleman conceives of, he must be able to say it. Whatever he says, he must be able to do. So it's a very strong thing, and that's right at the heart of Confucian tradition. And all dynasties, if you like, when they start, that is indeed the first thing they set about doing is sort of rectifying the names. This became a real item of business. And no less so in the People's Republic. But yeah, there's also family dynamics as well. Like that's the other thing that really kills you in Chinese culture is, I got to name my kids without consulting my in-laws. Not so in China, or very rarely.
Yeah, 名不正言不顺. Yes.
Just,
so you do have to have the right names. Yes. We want to. I'm mindful of the time. We're trying to go through as much as we can, and I wanted to also share that many might not be aware that actually the zoo is also a museum, and the role of the museum have changed considerably. And then I think that once upon a time, we in the visual art world, we might be museums in our context might be curiosity cupboards, but I think in terms, and then we'll move from curiosity cupboards into institutions of learning. And then with COVID, we find that actually we're now become platforms for health and well-being. Wen-Haur, has the role of the zoo changed in this day and age?
Very much so, Chye Hong. And you were right that, from the very beginning, zoological collection, so-called, is very much a model after museum. So you collect animals that you want. In our case, rather than museum collections, we will view our animals as living collection, which from time to time we still refer to them as such. And it used to be that, people would go out on this expedition, on these journeys to collect animals. If you can recall, David Attenborough, a very well-known TV presenter and conservationist, he started up his very first TV program that made his name. It's actually called Zoo Quest. They actually sent him overseas to various parts of the world to bring animals in, to collect animals in the wild, specifically to put in zoos. So we don't do that anymore. So nowadays, the zoos very much we view ourselves as conservation organizations. Yep, we still have animals in our care, and we still need to sort of curate and collect them in such a way. But the ultimate goal is to so that we can conserve the species. So how it works is that, we conserve species in various ways. The most important way that we do it is via connecting them with people. So, you know, if you think about it, more than 50% of the human population nowadays live in urban areas, and more of us are, you know, losing connection with nature. So the way we can do it is by, you know, if you have well-run zoos, we take care of them really well, and we connect them with people, urban population. So to change people's behavior, to raise their awareness, so that they can join us to conserve the species. So that's one way of how we can conserve them. And we can talk about other ways of how we protect species in the wild a little bit later as well. And in terms of how do we decide what species to collect? So firstly, if we talk about cuteness, right? So in order for people to want to come to our zoo to view animals, to have that connection, to build the emotional bond, firstly, we need to have very, very attractive species. So cute animal being one of them, charismatic another one. The term that quite often we use is charismatic mega vertebrates. They tend to be charismatic, they tend to be big as well. So that you have these animals that make up the ones that bring a lot of people into the zoo. But very importantly, we also take care of many species that might not be, you know, on first sight so cute to look at. So then a lot of these are very important from a conservation point of view. They are likely to be threatened in the wild, and then we need to take care of them so that, you know, to ensure that, you know, to breed them if necessary. And one of the way we do it is part of a collection can be considered an assurance colony, meaning that in the event that something would happen into the wild, that, you know, we still have a population in human care that sometime in the future, perhaps, you know, we continue breeding them, they can go back into the wild. So, and then since we're talking about living things, so we do not do the zoo quest thing anymore. It certainly is now considered is unethical. You cannot go to the wild just because I want to have it in our park, let's go and collect them. So most of the animals in our care nowadays are actually born in human care. It's exchanges with other zoos. And I mentioned the start bookkeeping in the giant panda. So many species that in our care nowadays are part of those breeding programs. So we just exchange it from one zoo to another. So very rarely we would collect them from the wild. Once in a while, if we need to collect them in the wild, it's pretty much to say that, you know, this particular species, they are doing so poorly in the wild. If we don't bring them in, we might lose them forever. So that is one of the, you know, few times one of the criteria when would be going out to collect them. And usually that is in discussion with a group of, you know, field scientists, conservationists. So all those experts in discussion agree that, you know, it's a good idea we bring them in. So it cannot be that, you know, as a zoo, we just decided that, oh, you know, that animals need saving now, let's go and collect them in the wild. We don't do that. So I think the basic principles when we look at how do we collect our species nowadays, firstly, understandably, is legal, has to be legal. And that is actually the easiest criteria to fill, believe it or not. Secondly, has to be sustainable. So that it means that if we were to bring them in, it mustn't negatively impact their chances of survival. Hence, very rarely nowadays do we go out into the wild to bring them into our care. And last but not least, probably the most difficult, the highest principle to keep must be ethical. So the ethics of it, it means also that, you know, is it ethical that for us just to bring them into the wild? And also it means that once they're in our care, we must be very, very sure that, you know, we can take care of them really well, their welfare, we must be able to provide all that they need. So those are the three basic principles, being able to keep them, acquire them legally, sustainably, and ethically.
I think in a sense, I think if we go back to the Panda program, I would consider that the Panda is a long-term loan, like what we do in the other parts of the museum world. We do have long-term loans, and then we sometimes feel if we have a gap in the collection, we actually use a long-term loan to fill the gaps. But I'm going to move forward to looking at this idea of conservation and sustainability. I think that in 2016, the International Union for Conservation of Nature has downlisted the giant panda from the endangered to vulnerable. Does this mean that the giant panda is out of the red?
Not at all. That's a very good question, Chye Hong. I think one of the audience members posed that question as well. So when we look at, decide how threatened a species is in the wild, we rely on this IUCN Red List, the International Union of the Conservation of Nature. So they have a grading system. So you have the one that are very common, least concern, to the one that are extinct. So in between, there are three categories called vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered. So the endangered means they have a very high risk of becoming extinct. Critically endangered is extremely high risk of going extinct. Vulnerable is still a very high risk of going extinct. So, but as far as giant panda is concerned, it is testament to the fact that all the work that has been done by the Chinese government, and including us, Singapore, who have giant panda in our care, that means that we're participating in part of the program to save the giant panda, that we're contributing to that. We're doing the right thing. So it is going backwards, so that, rather than, for them to go from vulnerable, endangered, critical, endangered, and then extinct, we want the trend to be going the other way. In fact, currently, the top zoos in the world are starting a campaign called Reverse the Red. So we want it to go the other way. So giant panda is actually a very good example. It's gone from endangered to vulnerable, and many people misunderstood that for being that they are not threatened anymore. No, they're still a threatened species. They are still facing a high risk of going extinct in the wild, but we are doing the right thing. The point is that we need to continue doing that so that they are totally out of risk altogether.
So the Panda program might give the impression that we are focusing on a single species. Could you help to debunk the myth that is that what we're looking for? Or, I mean, when we talk about conserving the giant panda, are we actually looking at just one species that we're protecting?
From our point of view, as a conservation organization, not at all. I think what it is, a giant panda being so cute, so hyper charismatic, they get, their lion's share of publicity, right? So basically, they just advertise themselves, right? Put a giant panda there, everyone say they want to know about it. So what we do is that we use the charismatic to help us to attract people so that we can tell them more about our animals. So that's part of the things that we do. We call them flagship species, so that people is more likely to come to our park to look at very, very charismatic animals, giant panda being one of them. However, in our parks, we actually take care of over 1,000 species and about 15,000 animals. Not all of them are highly charismatic. Some of them could be a bit scary. Some of them are, small and sort of very cryptic. You need to look very hard to find them, but we look after all these species. But very, very importantly, when it comes to actually protecting them in the wild, and that is another role that zoos do nowadays in terms of conservation. Apart from taking care of animals in our park grounds, we actually contribute financially as well as in kind, in skill sets, in training, protecting threatened wildlife in the wild. In our case, in Singapore as well in Southeast Asia, where there's a very high degree of biodiversity that are very, very threatened with high degree of extinction. So the program, the species that we concentrate on in protecting them in the wild is actually the unknown, unloved. Many people don't even know about them. So the program, the conservation program that we take part in is called ASAP. So spell ASAP, right? We need to do something to them very quickly. But it also stands for Asian Species Action Partnership. So what we concentrate on protecting are the critically endangered land animals as well as freshwater fish in Southeast Asia. So remember when I say that critically endangered, means they are standing an extremely high risk of going extinct. And currently there are about 200 species on the list. Unfortunately, the list continues to go up. And part of the reason is not only that because of, of the human activity, more and more of the species in the wild becoming more threatened. A lot of them are actually unknown, and part of our conservation cycle, we do what we call assess, plan, and act. So the assessment, actually, you look into a group of animals and then decide that, how threatened they are. So once you've done the assess, they go into the Iucn Red List. And then you do a planning session to say that what should we do to help this species. The last bit is the act. So a lot of people are more familiar with the act part. They're not so familiar with the assess and plan. So we do all three. So the thing with a lot of the Southeast Asian species here, many of them are actually unknown. So once we do the assess, we found out that, well, a lot of them are actually quite threatened. So they go onto the red list as well. So I think from our point of view, the overall effort is that we really, really would like to reverse the rate, rather than, unfortunately, the ongoing trend is that more and more species are being more and more threatened.
Could we call up the poll that we did just now? Maybe we can share a little bit about the chosen species. So I think, Graeme, which one did you choose earlier on?
I went for the pangolin.
So is there a reason why you went for the pangolin?
Well, the picture is very, very cute. And I thought going for the panda was a bit too obvious given the title of the talk. And the poor old pangolin, it gets blamed for a lot of things, particularly the lockdown I'm in right now.
Dr. Cheng, would you want to share with us what are some? I believe that some of these species are actually, we can see them in the Mandai Wildlife Group, which is the zoo. And could you share with us a little bit about them? I think they are chosen for particular reasons.
Absolutely. So all the species that you see here, we certainly take care of them within our parks. Pangolin in night safari, the Roti Island snake-necked turtle at the zoo, straw-headed boopoon Jurong Bird Park, giant panda at river safari. So we also contribute either directly or indirectly in protecting them in the wild as well. From Graeme's point of view, the pangolin is very well chosen. So first of all the three species other than the giant panda, they are all critically endangered, and they are all found in Southeast Asia. So that in terms of their threat level from going extinct is much higher than giant panda. So giant panda, because of all the work that has been done, they are slightly less threatened, but all the other three species are very threatened. So not many people would have heard about them. So that is why probably people are not choosing them. And they are not your typically considered highly charismatic animal, so that, a lot of people would not know them. If you do not know about them, it is very hard for people to want to care for them. So, but from our point of view, that, these are actually the species that we concentrate on with our conservation effort. Pangolin is the most trafficked animals in the world because they are coveted for their scales. For Chinese medicine, they are also regarded as a delicacy in certain part of Eastern Asia. And then the Roti Island snake-necked turtle, we actually have a program. Recently, we just repatriated about 25. We sent them back to Indonesia. So they were actually collected to extinction on their island, on the native island, the Indonesian island of Roti Island. And then straw-headed bobo, they were doing quite well in Singapore. So many people who actually, like to do bird watching, they feel like, hey, they're very common in Singapore. We've seen many of them. And actually, that is true because Singapore, the birds are very well protected. Generally, wildlife are well protected in Singapore. So they are not threatened in Singapore. They do relatively well. However, in the whole of Southeast Asia, straw-headed bobo, like many of his cousins, all the songbirds are once again collected to near level of extinction. So we were talking about cuteness earlier, right? Cuteness basically implied a certain degree of attractiveness, people like them. And then if you look at these, pangolin, the turtle, and the straw-headed boo, in their way, they're all coveted by human as well. And that actually was the major reason of them being so threatened. I've spoken about the pangolin, the snake-necked turtle. Actually, they were coveted by this group of people. Their hobbies, they're very serious hobbies. They will collect in the wild and quite often legally. However, they weren't done in a sustainable, ethical way. So in fact, the snake-necked turtle, before they were actually, formally studied by the scientists, they've already been collected to, being extinct in the wild already. So once again, because some people like them, it threatens their survival. Same thing with the straw-headed boo. In Southeast Asia, there is currently a crisis called the songbird crisis. Also, it is called the silent forest syndrome. So we go to many of the forests in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Indonesia, that the forest looks beautiful, full of trees, except that it is totally silent. You don't hear any birds at all. And because there is such a great demand for songbirds, they've been trapped to literally empty out the forest. So these are the species, not very well known, not really cute, but from our point of view, this is our conservation focus. So that from the point of view that, the giant panda get a lot of airtime, and we do actually maximize on their marketing power. But when it comes to actual conservation effort, we actually do focus on those species that really, really need it the most.
I think we should take a detour to look at some other pictures of the recent baby panda. Perhaps we can slide.
Sure. I think probably we can go for another overdose of cuteness. So the giant panda baby continues to grow really, really well. And as I said, all it does is sleep and drink and grow, and doing all of them very well. And the point is, right, we're talking about being cute, like even in sleeping, that, they just sort of, have so many different poses. And yeah, so what else can I say? It's just cute. So next slide, please. So yes, now that our keeper have been able to condition Jia to be able to be more relaxed and having that trust now that, that now she allows the keeper to take the cub out quite regularly so that we can, do all sorts of measurement, make sure that it's growing really well. Measure it, and the previous picture actually shows that, we're checking that the teeth is growing well, so that, in a few months time it can start, the little chomper can start taking the solid food, but not for a while yet. So growing really well, and now he's just slightly over half a meter now, so doing really well. And once again, the first time when the keeper took it out quite a few weeks ago, that, I was told that, the little one didn't like it at all, was wriggling quite a lot and making quite a lot of noise. But since then, he just couldn't care less. He just sleep through everything. I think we have another picture after this. Okay, so that is one of the, probably the not quite one of the recent weighing. He's about 3 kilograms now, growing really, really well. And as of last week, he's just tipped 4 kilograms, and he cannot fit into this basket anymore. So the keeper has to buy him another container. So, but yeah, so, and we look forward, as is customary to the Chinese custom, the next big milestone, we will be celebrating the 100th day announcement. So we're timing that, by the time we get there, we would have chosen a name, hopefully a very, very auspicious name that, that we will announce to the world, and that will be looking out for that 100th day announcement.
Wow. Anyway, just to quickly wrap up, we spotlighted on the Panda mania, cross-cultural exchanges, and the protection of wildlife. We also explored the use of animals in diplomacy in different forms, presented as gift or exchanged as diplomatic gesture, on loan, or an icon for biodiversity and sustainability. Now, very important question, back to this idea of the power of cute. Yay or nay? Graeme, perhaps you get you to respond first. Are you all for the power of cute?
Look, I think I have a slide that's ready to go on this. I felt just in the interest of democracy, someone had to disagree about the good side of cute. So here's my quick take on the dark side of cute. One thing I found really interesting talking to Wen-Haur is that everyone finds pandas cute. Like literally, we just respond to this symmetrical thing. And that means it's hardwired into us. And if I know that, and Wen-Haur knows that, and Chye knows that, people who work in marketing also know that, and they can take advantage of our hardwiring. Now, if you're on Facebook, apparently the average length of time you look at a Facebook post is less than 2 seconds. So how on earth do you get people to engage? And you do it through the power of cute. Here's an ad that was used in the last Australian election campaign. The dog has nothing to do with this message, but the dog gets you to stick and to get the message in what was probably one of the most nasty and polarizing election campaigns. And yet this dog and other cute things like this dog played a really important part in polarizing Australian society further than it's ever been. We're not America yet, but this dog did not help. So, nay.
Okay, Wen-Haur, are you all for the power of cute?
It's such a great example that what Graeme has raised. So in fact, what we're doing is at the end of the day, that, you know, from our point of view, what we are doing is maximizing on the cuteness of the giant panda, that, you know, and then we're doing it for the good, not only for the good of giant panda, but we want to make sure that, you know, we're using the cuteness, the attractiveness of giant panda to help other species as well, so that, you know, it makes it easier for us to connect to people. And, you know, look, I can't imagine that I'll be invited for a talk tonight, you know, to talk about, you know, the repatriation of the snake-necked turtle back to Indonesia, but I was invited to talk about giant panda. Because of that, I can tell, you know, your audience about all the other species. Hopefully I haven't sent them to sleep. So, but I think from my point of view that it is very important. And also to Graeme's point as well, the fact that giant panda is well protected and is cute is because we have a very, you know, effective protection framework, so that the giant panda doesn't become a victim of its own cuteness. So there are quite a few examples of, you know, cute animals, otters, slow lorises, which are totally unsuitable as pets, and that from time to time people would capture them illegally, unethically, and then market them as cute animals to keep as pet. So when that happens, so the cuteness of the animals actually ended up harming them. So I think from our point of view as conservationists, we need to make sure that that did not happen. And from a consumer point of view, I think it's very important to know that, you know, when you go out and interact with animals, hopefully we do not consume animals illegally, unethically, and unsustainably. I think the whole point is that, I guess if there's one message I want to give, is that, you know, as human beings, when we go out, when we interact with wildlife, let's do it in a legal, sustainable, and ethical way.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Wen-Haur. Thank you, Graeme. And thank you to you, our audience tonight. Thank you for spending Thursday with us. Now over to Nicole for the final words.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cheng, Dr. Smith, and Dr. Lim for today's talk. I think the next time I see pictures of the new baby panda, I will also be thinking of the other less cute endangered animals and all the thought and effort that has gone into cultivating diplomatic ties as well as conservation. And I'm definitely looking forward to voting for our baby pandas' new names soon. So thank you everyone for attending and sending in your comments as well. The Singapore Art Museum is very grateful for having the chance to hear from Dr. Cheng and Dr. Smith today. We would love to know your thoughts on the program today. We hope you can take a moment to scan the QR code displayed on the screen now to access the feedback form. Your responses are very important to our design of our programs, and we really do read it. So we hope that you'll take a minute now to fill it up. Sam has a range of other programs as part of this exhibition, The Gift, which is currently on view at the National Gallery, Singapore. Please visit Sam's website for more information. Once again, thank you to our wonderful speakers, and a big thank you to our audience for spending your time with us. See you again soon. Bye-bye.